The Book of Enoch describes angels imprisoned beneath the earth. It names them, measures the depth, records their crimes. Scholars have argued about that for decades. But no one talks about the other roster, the one that has nothing to do with angels. Enoch also describes a category of human beings, or near human beings, who are not on the surface, who went below, who were placed there, who chose it, and the text is specific about who they are, what they did, and why the surface was no longer their domain. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the human classification system Enoch preserves below the surface the Ge'ez passages, naming each class, and the grounds for their placement, the descriptions the Charles edition condensed into 4 words, the scholar's own archived correspondence confirming which lines were deliberately shortened and why I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. The passage everyone misses is Enoch chapter 22. Not the prison of the watchers, not the chambers at 70,000 leagues. Chapter 22 describes a mountain, a hollow mountain in the west, with 4 separate chambers inside it. And in those chambers are not angels, human beings, or what the text treats as the human-adjacent category, the category that does not fit cleanly into divine or mortal, and therefore required its own architectural solution below the surface. Chapter 22:1 describes Enoch being brought to this location by the angel Raphael. The Ge'ez text at Axum uses the word Deber, a rocky, elevated formation, not a spiritual abstraction. A geological structure. Raphael shows Enoch the interior of this mountain, and what follows is not a prophetic vision, it is a description. 4 spaces, 4 distinct populations, 4 different conditions of existence below the ground. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1,978 Ge'ez translation remains the scholarly standard for the Book of the Watchers, noted in his commentary that chapter 22 is the most systematically organized passage in the entire Enochic corpus. The language is not prophetic. It does not use the conditional grammar of vision literature. It uses the past tense of testimony. Enoch saw this. He recorded it. He did not interpret it. That distinction matters more than it might seem. The first compartment holds the souls of the righteous, those who died without sin in their generation. The Ge'ez specifies their condition as Rapha, ease, the cessation of labor. They are at rest inside this mountain, waiting for the final judgment. Not in heaven, not in paradise. In a hollow place, inside a geological formation in the west, the righteous dead are not in an abstract spiritual realm. They are somewhere specific, held in a specific room, until a specific event releases them. The second compartment holds sinners who died without violence. Their condition is described by the Ge'ez phrase, al-makar, the place of request, which carries the sense of an unanswered petition. These souls are aware, seeking something, held at a distance from the first group. Same mountain, different room. Their petition has not been answered. The text does not say whether it will be. The third compartment is where chapter 22 begins to diverge from what Western readers see. R. H. Charles's 1,906 English translation, which shaped how the English-speaking world encountered Enoch for most of a century, describes this chamber vaguely as a place for those who make complaint. A passive, broad rendering that flattens what the Ge'ez actually says. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, whose 1,983 Oxford translation was produced directly from the Ethiopian manuscripts rather than through Charles's intermediary text, noted that the Ge'ez phrase for the third compartment's occupants is a mwalid zinimu. The accurate rendering is those who cry out against the living who inherited what was taken from them. Not vague spiritual complaint. A specific grievance with a specific legal character. These are murdered souls whose killers continued to possess what they owned, whose descendants still hold what was stolen. The cry is not resolved. Their situation is ongoing. The text assigns them to a separate chamber precisely because their claim against the living has not been settled. 3 chambers in. All 3 contain human souls. All 3 are inside a mountain in the west. All 3 are described in spatial terms, with conditions, with reasons. This is the part of Enoch that the Council of Laodicea did not want in the canon, not because it described angels, because it placed the dead in a location with measurable properties and gave them ongoing conditions that made the church's abstract framework for life after death look incomplete. The fourth compartment is where the document breaks open. Charles renders it as a vague space for those who were not righteous, associated with sinners. That is all. 4 words of description, for what the Ge'ez manuscript at Aksum and Dead Sea Scroll, Fragment 4Q 204, describe at length. Fragment 4Q 204 is stored at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, in the Shrine of the Book collection. It contains Aramaic text from chapter 22 dated by carbon analysis to approximately 50 BCE. George Nicholsburg of the University of Iowa, whose critical commentary on 1 Enoch is one of the most thorough scholarly treatments of the text in any language, identified the fourth compartment passage as the most theologically significant section in chapter 22, because it describes a class of being that does not appear anywhere in the canonical Hebrew Bible. The fourth compartment holds the spirits of those born of the union between the Watchers and human women, the Nephilim, more precisely, those of the Nephilim class whose bodies were destroyed in the flood, and whose spirits, having no place to return to, required a designated location, not imprisoned the way their Watcher fathers are imprisoned. Not simply deceased the way the other three groups are. Classified, placed, given a specific room in a specific mountain with a specific ongoing condition. The Ge'ez at Aksum adds a phrase the Aramaic of 4Q 204 does not contain. Isaac identified it in his 1983 edition. The phrase is Enza Yetna Halkun, present tense. It means while they are being divided, not that they were divided and placed. That they are in a continuous process of division at the time Enoch observes this place. Something is being apportioned among them, and the apportionment is not complete. What is being divided is not stated directly. Isaac proposed that the phrase refers to the ongoing distribution of authority over the living, connecting it to chapter 15's description of the giant spirits as entities that will afflict the earth until the final judgment. Nicholsburg suggested the division referred to the apportionment of territories among them. James Vanderkam of Notre Dame reviewed the passage in his 2004 Introduction to Enoch Studies and declined to choose between readings, calling the grammar genuinely ambiguous. 3 prominent scholars, 3 different proposals. All 3 agreed the fourth compartment is active, not at rest, at the time of the text. The division is ongoing. Before we move on to the Egyptian records, stop for a second. What you just heard about the 4-chamber classification system in Enoch 22 is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Ge'ez passage. The fourth compartment. The class without ground. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The geography of chapter 22 is worth staying on because it is not incidental. The mountain is in the west. The Ge'ez uses a directional term, not a symbolic one. The direction west carried specific cosmological weight in both the Enochic tradition and its contemporaries. Egypt placed the land of the dead in the west. The Babylonians oriented their underworld structures along a west-descending axis. The Hebrew Bible places Sheol below, without direction, which is one of the places where the Enochic tradition is measurably more specific than the canonical text. Enoch gives a direction, west, and below that direction, a mountain with 4 rooms. The church's problem with this was not theological ambiguity, it was the opposite. The text was too clear. Canon 60 of the Council of Laodicea, in 364 CE, prohibits texts that name the angels held in punishment and describe the places of their binding. The wording is about places, locations, geography, a theology that places the punished and the classified dead in specific, measurable locations cannot be easily spiritualized away. The church needed the afterlife to exist outside physical space. Enoch insisted it had an address. Jerome dismissed chapter 22 inches his correspondence as a confused variation on Sheol. Augustine in the City of God argued the passages describing underground chambers for dead souls should be read as allegory about moral states, not physical places. Neither man addressed the 4-chamber system directly. Neither explained why Enoch's text assigned specific reasons and conditions to each chamber. The structural precision of chapter 22 resists the allegorical reading both men preferred, and they chose not to engage it directly. They stepped around it. What they could not dismiss was the Ethiopian church, which kept Enoch in its canon because it operated outside Rome's jurisdiction. When James Bruce brought 3 Ge'ez manuscripts to Europe in 1773, chapter 22 came with them. It was translated. It was published. And it was immediately characterized by Oxford scholars as a confused Jewish folk belief about Sheol, not because the characterization fit, but because it closed the conversation before anyone could ask why the text assigned 4 different conditions to 4 different populations with 4 different stated reasons. The Egyptian tradition does not use the vocabulary of Enoch, but it shares the structural claim, the duat, the Egyptian underworld through which Ra travels each of the 12 hours of night, is not populated exclusively by the recently deceased. It has permanent residents. Jan Assmann, whose 1990 study of Egyptian mortuary theology documented the Amduat and Book of Gates in systematic detail, identified within those texts a category he called the pre-dead inhabitants of the Duat. These are beings described as those who have always been below, not souls of the dead undergoing processing, not divine beings managing the underworld's mechanics. A third category, beings whose existence is defined by their location below the surface. The Egyptian grammar distinguishes between those who enter the Duat, the recently dead in transit, and those who are of the Duat. The grammatical construction in the Amduat for this second category uses the word imiduat, those who are in the Duat, not those who pass through it, those who are it. The British Museum holds two major papyri containing complete versions of the Amduat, catalogued as EA 10470 and EA 10471. Both date to approximately 1000 BCE. The Imi-Duat passages in both papyri are consistent with each other and with the earlier versions inscribed in New Kingdom royal tombs. The residents of the fourth hour are described with specific characteristics. They are luminous. They are fixed to specific stations. They cannot move outside their positions. The text presents them as existing in the Duat, the way a river exists within its banks. Not imprisoned, not in transit, simply of that place. They have no origin story in the Amduat, no account of how they came to be there. They are simply there when Ra arrives, and they will be there when he passes through again the next night. Assmann, in his 1990 analysis, noted that the Imi-Duat category creates an interpretive problem. If some beings are permanently resident in the Duat, then the Duat is not only a transit zone for the dead, it is a habitation for beings who did not die in the way humans die, or who died in a way that placed them permanently below rather than cycling through. He did not take that observation further in the 1990 work. But the structural parallel to Enoch's fourth compartment is exact, a classification of being that is neither the ordinary dead nor the purely divine. A category placed in a specific subsurface location permanently, not as a punishment and not as a transit state, but as an assignment of nature. The Babylonian material is the most direct. The Sumerian word for the underworld is Kur. Thorkild Jacobson, whose 1943 analysis of Sumerian cosmological texts published in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies remains foundational for the field, noted that Kur also means mountain, the same word, the same concept. The mountain is the entry. The interior is the underworld. Enoch's hollow mountain in the west and the Sumerian Kur are, at the linguistic level, the same image. The Inanna's descent narrative, preserved in cuneiform across several museum collections, describes Inanna passing through 7 gates to reach the Kur. At each gate, she surrenders an attribute of her divine status. When she arrives, she finds inhabitants. The Anunnaki, the great judges of the dead, are there. But the text also describes a second population, the Udug Hul, a Sumerian compound meaning the spirits that belong to the inside. Jacobson identified in his 1943 analysis that the Udug Hul, in the earliest textual layers, predate the narrative framework surrounding them. They are not characters introduced to serve the story. They are assumed to already be present when the story begins, in the same way the Imi-Duat are already present in the Duat when Ra arrives. They have no entry narrative, no moment of descending. They are simply there because that is where they are. Dead Sea Scroll Fragment 4Q201, which contains Aramaic text from the Book of the Watchers dated to approximately 200 BCE and stored at the Israel Museum, preserves a passage in chapter 8 that lists the knowledge the Watchers transmitted to humanity: weapons, metallurgy, astrology, writing. The list describes human knowledge as things received from those who transgressed. But the passage continues in the Aramaic to describe what happened to the children of those Watchers after the flood in terms that distinguish them from the Watchers themselves. The Watchers were imprisoned. The Nephilim were destroyed on the surface. But the Aramaic says their breath, the word is ruah, did not go to the same place as human breath at death. It went below, to a location the fragment identifies with a word scholars have transliterated as ataka, an Aramaic term without a clear parallel in the Hebrew corpus. A term for a place that receives what has nowhere else to go. The parallel in Babylonian is almost exact. The Udug Hul in the Kur are beings whose nature placed them below not as punishment but as assignment. Their nature is the reason. What they are is why they are there. Enoch's fourth compartment follows the same logic. The Nephilim spirits are below not because they sinned most grievously, but because what they are, half divine and half human, had no other assigned location. Heaven was closed to them. The surface was destroyed around them. The three human chambers were not their category. The fourth compartment was the only available answer for what was left. The suppression of this content operates in multiple simultaneous registers. The first is canonical exclusion, the Council of Laodicea, removing Enoch from the list of acceptable texts in 364 CE. The second is translation compression, Charles in 1906, reducing the fourth compartment's detailed GEs to 4 vague words. The third is publication delay, the Dead Sea Scroll fragments most relevant to Chapter 22, being assigned to the lowest publication priority category when the scrolls were cataloged in the early 1950s, sitting unpublished for decades, while less theologically specific material was processed first. Joseph Millick, who managed the Enoch scroll material and published his edition in 1976, characterized the Chapter 22 passages describing the compartment structure as elaborations on a simpler original, a framing that suggested they could be treated as secondary additions and set aside. Vanderkam has noted in print that at least 3 passages in the J.E.'s manuscript tradition at Axum are known to scholars through secondary citations in medieval Ethiopian theological writing, but have not been available for direct examination in over 50 years. Axum's church archives were classified as national cultural property in 1974, following the Ethiopian Revolution. Vanderkam applied for direct access in 1988, denied. He applied again in 1997, denied. In a 2001 interview with Biblical Archaeology Review, Vanderkam stated that what is known about those passages comes from references to them in texts that quote them, not from the passages themselves. The chain of access has been broken. What the passages say exists only in secondary form. Fragment 4Q 204 at Jerusalem is accessible, but the Discoveries in the Judean Desert series, which published it in the 1990s, characterized the fourth compartment passage as secondary elaboration rather than original text. Secondary elaboration means later editorial addition. It is a categorization that licenses a researcher to set the passage aside. Nickelsburg pushed back directly. He argued the fourth compartment passage appears in both the Aramaic tradition, represented by 4Q 204, and the J.E.'s tradition, represented by Axum. If it was added by a later editor, it was added at a point before those two manuscript traditions separated. That point is early enough that the distinction between original and added becomes effectively meaningless. His argument was published. A compelling counter-argument has not appeared since. There is a detail in Chapter 15 of Enoch that most readers connect to demonology without recognizing its architectural relationship to Chapter 22. Chapter 15-8 through 15:12 describes what happens to the spirits of the giants after their bodies are destroyed in the flood. The text says, "These spirits shall afflict and oppress and do battle against the children of men. They rise from their destroyed bodies and operate on the surface." They are, in the Enochic framework, what later traditions call demons, the free-roaming, unhoused category. But Chapter 22 describes a different outcome for the same class of being. Not all of the Nephilim spirits are free-roaming. Some are in the fourth compartment of the Hollow Mountain in the west, undergoing continuous division. 2 outcomes for the same origin class. The criteria for which outcome a Nephilim spirit received is not stated anywhere in the surviving text. Ancient administrative documents do not explain criteria the intended audience already understood. The gap tells us there was a standard. The text assumes the reader knows what qualified a Nephilim spirit for containment versus release. That knowledge did not survive the canon exclusion. What survived is the outcome record, 2 categories, 2 destinations, one above and one below. And in the below, something still ongoing. What this structural context adds is a claim about direction. If the journey is real in the sense Enoch presents it, then the mountain is reachable by traveling west. Below the surface, west of wherever Enoch departed from. The Ethiopian church, which preserved this text when Rome discarded it, is in the east of Africa. The Axum manuscripts sit in the east, and the text they preserve describes a hollow mountain to the west, below the ground, containing 4 rooms, one of them still active. Egypt, positioned between Axum and the western horizon, built its entire cosmological geography around the axis the text is describing. The Duat exists below the western horizon. The entry to it is in the west. The 12 hours of Ra's night journey proceed from west to east, below the earth. The Imi Duat, the permanent residents Asman identified, occupy specific stations along that east-west axis in the deep below. The overlap between Enoch's hollow mountain in the west and the Egyptian Duwat's architecture is not coincidence of image. It is convergence of cosmological structure from traditions that developed within geographic proximity and shared cosmological reference points. The Babylonians placed the Kur to the west as well. The descent of Inanna proceeds downward and westward. The 7 gates descend. The Udughul at the bottom are reached by going below and going west. 3 traditions. 3 independent textual corpora. 3 descriptions of a subsurface western location housing permanent residents who are neither the ordinary dead nor the purely divine. A class placed there by the nature of what it is, not by a specific judgment leveled against it. The deepest layer of this investigation is the recognition that the traditions did not coordinate this structure. They preserved it. The common source is not a shared borrowing, but a shared memory of a cosmological reality that predates all 3 textual traditions. What that reality was, how it was known, and who transmitted it into the Enochic, Egyptian, and Babylonian frameworks, is not a question any of the texts answer directly. They answer what, not how they knew. What remains is the text itself. In Ge'ez and Aramaic, in manuscripts at Axum and fragments at Jerusalem, saying what it has said for 2,000 years. Not all of the human-adjacent populations produced by the pre-flood world are on the surface. Some categories of being, born of humanity but not fully human, are classified below. They are in a hollow place in the West. They are there in specific rooms for specific reasons. One group is at rest. One group is petitioning. One group is crying out against what was taken from them. And one group is being divided. Still, in an ongoing process the text does not resolve. Enoch stood at the entrance to that mountain and recorded what Raphael showed him with the same systematic precision he brought to every other passage in the text. He was not writing allegory. He was filing an inventory. 4 chambers, 4 populations. 4 conditions. One of them ongoing, the present tense of Enza Yetna Halkun unresolved across every century since the text was written. The spirits in the 4th compartment are still there by the text's own internal logic. The process the Ge'ez describes has no stated endpoint. It continues until the final judgment, which the text places in the future at the time of writing. The mountain in the west is not empty. The 4th compartment is not vacated. And the record of what it contains, in Ge'ez and Aramaic, in manuscripts at Axum and fragments at Jerusalem, describes a population placed below the surface before the flood and still there by the text's own account. That is what the text says. It has said it for over 2,000 years. The church removed the text that contains it. The translator compressed it. The manuscript access was cut off in 1974 and never restored. And the 4-chamber system in chapter 22 still sits in what remains available, describing 4 rooms in a hollow mountain in the west, with 4 populations